Hi, and good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're located. And welcome to the Guarding Our Legacy panel discussion on the legacy of Black Wall Street. My name is Jareyah Bradley, and I am a product manager at PushBlack, the nation's largest Black nonprofit media organization. And I will be serving as your moderator today. And today we'll be discussing the documentary you all just watched, Descendant from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. And before we get started, I would like to introduce our amazing panelists. You can raise your hands if you like and say a word or two. First, we have Byron Crenshaw, managing partner and general partner of 1863 Ventures and descendant of Black Wall Street, who was featured in the film. We also have Nailah Jefferson, filmmaker, founder, and CEO of Fun Black Founders. Excuse me. And then we have Monique Aiken, managing director and contributing editor of Tip and Impact Alpha. Thank you all. I'm so happy to have you here and so grateful to be able to screen this documentary and hold this conversation. And we can jump right in. So this documentary gave us a very invaluable history in the Greenwood District through the lens of its descendants. And as mentioned in the start of the documentary, for so long, so many Black people didn't even really know the history of Black Wall Street, myself included. I didn't learn about it until my adulthood. And so when we consider its legacy, we have to factor that in, along with the inhumanity of its dismantling, which in a way might alter how some of us view it. So this question is for everyone, but Byron, I wanted to start with you. As a descendant, what would you consider the legacy of Black Wall Street to be for Black Americans today?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think as far as what the legacy is for Black Americans broadly today, I feel like it really is a symbol of hope, a symbol of pride, and a symbol of what we can and did achieve, and what we can do even better. Uh, yeah, I think it's really difficult to look at, and part of me, it's hard to like look at the same documentary and not try to like hold back and like bottle up because it is difficult in a way and heartbreaking. But I think really as much as it is heartbreaking, it's deeply empowering.
Nala, how about you? What would you consider the legacy of Black Wall Street today?
I mean, I agree with Byron. It's complicated. There are so many emotions, I think, that come into play when you think about the history. Of course, there's the joy and there's the pride because of what was built, especially when you think about the time. It was not even 50 years removed from slavery. But then when you think about the injustice that these people and their families had to endure, that's quite profound as well. And it is heartbreaking, but I think the bigger takeaway, and with everybody, they can take away from the story whatever they want. But for me, I think one of the biggest takeaways is kind of pride and just knowing that it makes me feel empowered in a sense, and knowing that we could do it again. Because when you think about where Black people were at that time in history and what we were able to accomplish, I mean, the odds were completely stacked against us. So we can really accomplish anything. It's a fight that we're going to have to continue to. It's always a battle, right? But I think there's nothing that we can't do if we don't if we put our minds together and we collectively work together. There's nothing that we can't accomplish. So in that, it makes me very hopeful.
Monique, I want to give you a chance to answer to someone not attached to the film.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Byron and Nailah, for putting this out here into this world, because I think this is part of this never forget movement. In some ways, also learn about the history that was erased, and we have an opportunity now to use the energy from this outrage that we should all collectively feel at this horrific injustice that was perpetrated against our communities, and really sit with that for a moment and say, what can this channel for us both the pride aspects that you mentioned, Nailah, but also what else does it bring up for us in the ways that we have been collectively attacked? And I don't have a personal connection to Tulsa. My family's from Jamaica, but we all have experienced some attack in our communities in some ways. And there are literally lists of massacres that have happened in the United States, not to take anything away from Tulsa, because it was among the worst. More than 300 lives lost, 10,000 Black people lost their homes, 60 businesses destroyed, people displaced in internment camps. A lot of people don't, the day that it stopped was not the day that the horrific events of Tulsa happened. That has a long tail. Mm-hmm. And that destruction in today's dollars would be $150 to $200 million worth of destruction. Not to mention the creativity, the Black genius, the wealth to which to build upon. And I just want everyone to sit with that for a moment. And, I honor your ancestors, Byron, and anyone on this webinar who are listening in who are from Tulsa. The scale of the tragedy is unimaginable for me personally. And imagine those who have been there, who live there, who live around the rubble. And I think what it brings for me is, look at our resilience. Byron is still here, and he made beauty despite this. So I just wanted to comment on that and just to appreciate everyone who's involved in helping us remember that which was attempted to be fully erased, including our people and the communities of 36 blocks in Greenwood.
Thank you, Monique. And I appreciate that. I think setting that we're in now just speaks a ton to Black progression. We're in a digital space post-pandemic, and we're all here still honoring our ancestors and sharing these stories. And I just feel like that's just a huge testament, and it means a lot to me as well. And speaking to that, and to the point that Monique brought up, historically, we've seen countless attempts to impede on Black progression, much like what happened in Tulsa, as well as the laws that went to dismantling the rebuilding of Black Wall Street as well. So I'd love to hear from you, Monique, if you're comfortable. What are your thoughts on ways we can use what we know to fight back in today's time and take some of these lessons from Tulsa and these other incidents?
Sure, I'm happy to share some thoughts. For those who don't know, I host a podcast called The Reconstruction with Impact Alpha, one of the main news magazines for the digital news magazines for the impact investing space. And one of the things that I talk about is moving capital towards justice. At least that's the theme. What are the things that we need to rethink? What are the things we need to redress? And Byron said it eloquently in the film. We need to right wrongs in order to have redress for these harms that were caused to people. And then where can we liberate? And so often what we find is that the rules are changed in the bottom of the ninth inning for our people, for our communities. And in the film, they mention policies. And there's a great piece in this book that I've been reading, as we always have done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance. And I just want to share this. Colonialism or settler colonialism didn't seem complicated anymore. The mess that was wrapped up in birth did not seem so inevitable. It seemed simple. Colonizers wanted the land. Everything else, whether it was legal or policy or economic or social, whether it was the Indian Act or residential schools or gender violence, was part of the machinery that was designed to create a perfect crime. A crime where the victims aren't able to see or name the crime as a crime. Because the policy was changed. That is now the law of the land. They mentioned zoning laws, and urban renewal was, in many people's mind, urban removal of Black people and Indigenous people from the spaces and lands that they created. So when we think about what we can do to move forward in contemporary times, thinking about the rules and the norms that created what we have here and where we need to rethink them, because those were created in the imaginations and minds of people who did not want us to succeed and who created some rules that got the exact outcomes that they were looking for. We are marginalized, we were excluded, but in spite of all of that, people created amazing things. People created businesses and still do. And so when we think about what we need to do now, we need to have the seat at the table and create our own tables. Get involved democratically and in any number of ways, focus on having our voices heard, even when not necessarily invited. And social media and some of the platforms that we have now that our ancestors did not have allow us a voice that we did not have then. And we can, in collective power, create the spaces that we need on our own, and also enter those that would have never necessarily looked for us to be there.
Thank you. Nailah or Byron, do either of you have any thoughts on ways we can fight back in today's time and use some of the learnings from Black Wall Street to not have our legacies cut off?
I think one big thing and one way that the film is being used as a tool is to get the correct history, the right story out there. I think we know that, those who control those who tell the history control the narrative. And that's what it's been with the history of Tulsa, specifically what happened in the Greenwood district for years. And so I think that's one big thing, because wealth is not only money. Wealth is also history. It's also legacy. And from all of that breeds pride. And all of that is important, right, to community and pushing forward and continuing to build and joy and even mental health, all of that, physical health, all of that. And so I think just really thinking about ownership in that way as well. And that's what we were hoping to do with the film, give these descendants a chance to regain the narrative, to take control of their story. And because the voices of their ancestors were stolen for so long, and the story mistold and misrepresented by much of white Tulsa for so long, and then buried. So that's what we were hoping for this film to do. I think another big thing that has come out of it, when we talk about your earlier question about what comes out of the film and the message, is to think about what we can accomplish when when we don't have policies and red tape and urban removal and a white lynch mob coming after us. And there's so much pride again there. And so when I think about this story, yes, it's heartbreaking, but I'm trying not to, and I hope that we don't just stay in the past and we think about what to do to move forward. And that's why I think Byron's voice in the film was so powerful, because we don't have all the answers right now, but I think he lays out some good things to think about. When we think about progress, when we think about community, when we think about what a Black Wall Street 3.0 might look like.
We can go right into that too. I'm happy you brought that up. I really appreciated Byron in the film about and what that may look like for us. And speaking to Promised Land and Black Wall Street 3.0, like you mentioned, Nailah, there's been a shift in how we view wealth today. So many Black folks are prioritizing things like our mental health just as much as our careers and material possessions, which I think is also a direct result of what we've seen our ancestors go through, and that's not necessarily having to separate ways anymore. And one thing I wanted to speak of is, what would a Black Wall Street 2.0 look like? What are your thoughts in terms of wealth and where we now place importance in 2021? Maybe Byron, you can get us started with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of funny because this changes for me every time people ask me, because I feel like, especially like I'm 24 going on 25, so right now it feels I'm at this. It feels a very transitional point in my life where I think on a very atomic level for me too, a lot of my values and a lot of the kind of ways I structure wealth and all the things that we talked about is really changing by the minute. So to answer your question, I think right now, for me, what I think of when I think of Black Wall Street 3.0, right? I think it's definitely, Jareyah, like you were implying, I think very much taking the time that we now have and that we have the privilege to have now because of how hard our ancestors worked, and really hold space for ourselves, hold space for our communities in a way that's very, like empathetic, very, you can hold your head on my shoulders. And I think prioritizing things like wellness, all the things that we can do, we can create seats at the table that aren't even structured in the ways that we kind of had to structure our values to have survive in white society, And it's like, of course, we're going to still be, at least if we stay in America for the foreseeable short-term future, it's going to continue to be very whiteness dominated because of population and money. So I think it's difficult because there is this practical aspect. I mean, we're at this entrepreneur panel, right? There's this practical aspect that I think I struggle with, but at the same time, to answer your question, wellness,
Yeah. I would agree. As far as I'm 26, and I think that my thoughts on this 2 years ago would be different to speaking to, pre-pandemic life, and that's kind of having more of a lean as Black folks on things like wealth building in the physical material sense, whereas now we've kind of been forced to step back and really appreciate and certain instances of being able to rest that we didn't have in the past. I want to leave that one open, though, for Nailah and Monique, in case you both have anything to add as far as what Black Wall Street 2.0 would look like for you all.
I just want to bring up the point that you mentioned about the space and the privilege to really rest, because that's one point that Byron talks about in the film. His great grandfather experienced the Tulsa race massacre and then had to get up the next day and go to work, right? And when we think about a Black Wall Street 3.0, you're right, making space to not only take care of business, but take care of ourselves. Because I mean, Byron and I think we talked about this aside from the film, but I think working as artists and making sure you don't burn out, because I mean, then what else do you have to offer anyone else? And what else do you have to offer yourself? What do you have to offer your family? So I think kind of moving from a space of really prioritizing, like you said, material wealth and finding wealth and uplifting the importance of wealth in other areas of your life. For me, I'm not 26, but I'm grappling with how to figure that out. So it's an ongoing lesson and something that as I get older and evolve and figure out, exactly what brings me joy, that for me is Black Wall Street 3.0.
Yeah. I love that.
And I guess I'm the old lady in the room, being 45. But Byron, was it Dado at the end who says, "And it will be better"?
He says it's getting better. It's getting better. Mm-hmm.
And I think, that his resonant baritone just kind of held me at the end there. And what do we need to do to ensure that for him, to honor his words and to do our part and be good ancestors? And I think that that's one of the ways I imagine the 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever 0.0 that we end up with is how do we keep pushing and have joy, as you mentioned before, and in our communities and ourselves, in spite of it all, in spite of the outrageous things that have been perpetrated against us, and look at it and still have joy and still create. What is this new imagination that we need in order to take the shackles off of the possibility? And what does that look like? I think there are economic models that some people are building these days that can point us to a new way of doing things. I think of restorative economics that our dear friend Nailah Agbo is talking about. There's some information about her. I think about Anne Price with her centering Blackness as the prism through which we can define our activities. And all of those things, wealth is one dimension. Capital and how we move it and who stewards it is one dimension. But how do we create community in places where it expected competition? how are we thinking about these other forms of capital that we do have, including social and relational? And there are folks who are out there really producing rigorous academic pieces on thinking about how we can do right now differently in this pre-COVID, post-COVID paradigm that we have, that we cannot unsee the way that systems nearly failed us and the ways that, you know, we're all closer to death than we've ever been as a collective humanity. That's a collective trauma. I'm not taking anything away from the trauma specifically of the descendants of Tulsa, but I think we are all now able to resonate with that even more so because of those traumas that we're currently facing. What do we do with that energy? So we can ask ourselves to produce that 2.0 and think about these other refractions of what we have in forms of capital that we have, including our intellectual, our social, all of these other pieces of us that we can bring to bear to create that next reality. That it's fairer, that it's more just, that it centers people, it centers platinum, it sees everyone. I think, Byron, maybe you in the film mentioned something about truly understanding this is for humanity. And what does that look like? We've not seen it yet. What we know is injustice. What we know is right now. And how do we center that idea that we can do something differently and have the imagination to and the will to pursue those different choices?
Thank you. One thing you hinted at too was community, and I think that's another big aspect that I took from the documentary. I loved hearing about how the grandmother would be going through the other stores and interacting with them. And I think that's one thing that's just it transfers throughout the Black community. So I would love to hear from you all your thoughts on how we could also look at community or look at wealth from a community perspective and things that we may take from this film to build a better Black community. Byron, if you want to start with that one.
Yeah. I think in terms of both, especially in the context of community, I think I kind of had a little light bulb moment the other day, because I had this it's this kind of like viney house plant. I think it's called like Devil's Ivy. Wait, no, that's different. But basically, it's this very viney house plant, and I messed up and I knocked it over, and it fell into the ground. And then a lot of parts of it died, but I noticed that the actual plant that I thought was one unit was actually a whole bunch of very small individual things, both all rooting, And I think there's something beautiful to be said about that in the nature of a very such a tight knit, self supporting community that you literally just look at it as one thing from far back, And I think there's also a beauty in the decentralized and very perseverant nature of that plant that I think thinking about this film and thinking about Black Wall Street, and especially us as Black people in the future, I think there's something we can, I think, learn from human nature and learn from plant intelligence and nature as well, how we look at each other and how we can really structure ourselves in a very beautiful and self-sufficient way.
I like that. Do you have anything to add on community?
I love that. I have a plant in the corner. I'm about to get up and right? I'm about to dig deep and look. No, but I love that. I mean, because a lot of the answers are kind of all around us, and if we just kind of tap in and pay attention, it's right there. But to your point, the importance of community, and another thing that's brought up in the film is it's celebrating Black people, but every type of Black person, right? I think that's a huge point, because when we think about community and we think of success, there are only so many people that we kind of let into that group and into that club. And I don't think that has been to the benefit of the Black community. And so I think just rethinking what's successful and who is important. And I mean, of course, it's all of us, and what we can bring to the table and what voices are heard. I think we need to rethink that too, because a lot of what we put emphasis on, or a lot of what we put value on, was defined by what white people put value on, and how white people saw us and how white people valued us. And I think by now we get it. Like, we can't play by their rules. It hasn't been to our benefit. So just kind of rethinking how we see community and how we see one another, and how each and every one of us has something to contribute. Each and every story. That's another good point that Byron, you bring up sometimes. It's like, whose stories get told, not just those successful entrepreneurs on Black Wall Street. We can learn from every one of them. So I think just kind of rethinking that as well, and who we put value in, who we shine lights on, who we amplify and uplift. That's true community, not just kind of who has traditionally been seen as the stars. Just a place where everybody can be seen and celebrated and valued.
Agreed. Monique, do you have anything to add on community?
I really love the idea of opening the aperture of what community is and who's in it, and thinking about how really as communities of color, broadly beyond just the Black community, we're all on the same side against white supremacy, and how that divisiveness has been a tactic to actually prevent the solidarity that would be required for us to be in more collective action together. I think about Reverend Dr. Barber and the People's Movement, and how the multiracial coalition is what's needed to combat any attacks, insidious that though they may be these days. They might not look like the same attacks of yesteryear, but they are folks trying to change the game on voter suppression right now, with bills across the country to disenfranchise us, again, particularly the Black community, as one of the largest groups of people of color out here. And so what does that look like if we were to band together and really say who is on our community? Certainly the Black community doing things amongst itself is fantastic, and Indigenous people and Latinx, but there's also this bigger fight that we have together. And it's against these kinds of attacks that happened in Tulsa, and the people who perpetrated them, and those who were not held accountable. The fact that January 6th happened and we haven't really seen it at the level of accountability that we ought, and that in Tulsa, one person was charged, and one person got redressable. And that one person was a white pawn shop owner. And we know that how many other thousands of people had things stolen from them. And so when I think about who's in our community, it's who all are going to fight back right now in this moment. And also, who do I want to succeed? I want all of us to win. And I think if we were to change our mindset about who's in community and tell the truth, that we are all fighting against this many-headed beast that is called white supremacy. And it pops up in many different ways. And I think the most revolutionary thing we can do, there's this quote, it's tell the truth loudly about what is just happening. The fact that these massacres have occurred in America, telling the truth loudly, creating films about it when folks wanted to bury it, that is a revolutionary act. And how many other acts of revolution can we undertake to be able to look at what's happening in the eye and just talk about it, quantify the racism, what toll it takes, not just on us individually, on our communities, but on the economy, the global economy, trillions of dollars. And certainly that is just one form of measuring capital. But think about the trauma and the mental health toll that has taken on individuals who've suffered under those hands. I think about the book Heather McGhee wrote, just literally telling the truth. Some of us, what racism costs everyone and what we can do to prosper together. And telling the truth about the tax system, that it's set up to hurt some and prosper others. And what happens if we just tell the truth? We would more of us would be on the same side. And I just like to write that word community with a capital C and broaden it as much as possible, because it's through inclusion and sharing the battles that we will be able to overcome.
Thank you. And thank you for the point about January 6th and just how we've seen the overall handling of Tulsa and other incidents with Black folks, and, it painting the picture for how America views and values Black life and things that happen to us. And to that point, I do want to take a second to open it up. What would, if there's retribution, what would that look like for Tulsa and its descendants? Byron, I don't know if I can't recall if it came up in the film, but could there be retribution? Is there anything the families have called for that we can band together as a community and also depend for?
Sorry, was
Byron?
that to me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry, I think I went out. Yes, I'm sorry. The question was retribution. Could there be retribution for Black Wall Street and families? And if so, what could that look like? Or has it been called for in the past?
Yeah, I think Monique put it really well that there's a lot of economic and emotional toll that the massacre has taken, right? And I think that there's people who are actively pushing for this a lot, like Justice for Greenwood is one. I'm sure that there's others that are in Tulsa still very much fighting full stride to seek justice. And I think the most frustrating thing being a descendant and growing up in Tulsa for me, especially going through it now that we're past the centennial in terms of date. I think the most disappointing thing for me is that a lot of things Tulsa did was very performative, and especially like white powers in Tulsa. I mean, I don't know if you all heard about the thing that happened before, but there was the Black Lives. I know Monique knows. There was that Black Lives Matter mural that was posted in the historic Greenwood district. It was on the street, and it was really beautiful. And a lot of us Tulsans had jokes were like, "Oh, they're going to take it down right after Election Day," but they actually took it down before Election Day, which was a shock to me. So it's like I think that's kind of I think it epitomizes a lot of the performative change that's happens in the city, and I think how do we seek retribution? It's that type of thing where it's like we know how we'll get it, and it's so difficult because we have to scream at the top of our lungs what we already know over and over and over again, and hope that the deaf ears finally open up. And it's like it's so upsetting. Like I remember growing up and hearing through my family and through the grapevine about the massacre, right? Like white people either suppressed it, didn't want to hear it, didn't know about it. Like kids, like my age, didn't know about it because their parents suppressed it. So I think the most difficult thing is knowing that like us pouring a gallon of water is the same as them just doing a couple drops, in terms of like if they were like as aware as we have to be about this, then it would just happen so much faster. So I think on a personal level for me and how I can try and push retribution, it's been very difficult because I'm conflicted. Because on one hand, I know that I really, really want this to happen, not only for my family, but for every family in all of Black America, right? And on this other hand, it's like this part of me that wants to be like, man, like this, it shouldn't even be me, like who's doing this hard work. You know? So I think, yeah. So I think personally, I try and talk to people when I have the energy. I try and be very, very uncompromising about my values and boundaries. And that's been on a personal level what I've been doing lately.
Yeah. Thank you. Nailah, do you have anything to add for retribution for Black Americans in general?
Gosh, reparations. I mean, it's an exhausting conversation.
Yeah.
Reverend Turner, who was in the film, he's a part of the ongoing lawsuit. He's fighting for reparations for his church. But I mean, are we due them? Yes. But I agree with Byron. Sometimes it can be so tiring. But I very much support those who are willing to continue to take on that fight, because I think we need them. We need those people who are going to continue to push those conversations forward, continue to fight. And one day it may break. But I agree with Byron in the fact that it can be like, you have to do, I think, what you can do. And sometimes it can be exhausting. But at the same time, if we want to draw inspiration from what happened with those who built up Black Wall Street, then you think perhaps there's nothing that we can't accomplish, right? So I'm hopeful, and I do hope, and I, I've seen the films that have come out and the interviews that have been done around the centennial, and I think that's what everybody was waiting to see. Is this just going to be performative? We're going to see what the city does, and unfortunately, that's the truth. It's very performative. I think, what was it, like the week of or 2 weeks before, the mayor finally came out and supported some type of investigation, but not a true investigation to see who was a part of the mob, who carried out the murders, the countless murders, the looting, things like that. So yeah. I hate to be like that, but it's it's performative, unfortunately. But I think you have genuine people like Justice for Greenwood, you have Reverend Turner, you have other people working on a larger scale for reparations for Black people as a whole. And I support those efforts, and I hope that one day they are fruitful.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your honest responses. I think it matters, and I totally agree with what Byron said, where I could see how, it's like, do what you can, and that just, the word is missing me right now, but having to bounce between, going for what everyone else is going, or just, doing what you can in your lane to get collective healing for your family, and doing what is well for the Black community and Black futures. And, as we all know, the Guardian Summer is calling for a total re-envisioning of the past and challenging the existence of our present world to create the future we envision for the next in line. So to bring it back to present, I would love to hear from you all, maybe one or two actionable ways that we can use the legacy of Black Wall Street and its descendants to build a better Black community in 2021. And I will pass that to Monique if you'd like to start. What can we do what are some actionable ways that we can use the legacy of Black Wall Street and others to build a better Black community in space times?
No, thank you. And I also want to point out the work of Human Rights Watch on the reparations front. It's both Tulsa specific. Dreesen Heath has an incredible body of work around reparations for Tulsa, and this in centering Tulsa as a microcosm of the larger reparations conversation. I mentioned Anne Price earlier on, and I posted a link to her Medium post centering Blackness. She also has a strong argument about reparations that I think would really resonate past a lot of the resistance that we have heard. But this is about building the will, the political will, and the collective will to put pressure on those who can make this change. This is a governmental question. This is something that we need to put the pressure on whoever's in office today to move the needle on this. And to the degree that we can get behind these campaigns, I think I would suggest to everyone to figure out, like, where can you be part of it? Is it through donations to the local efforts? Is it to the national efforts? Can you sign something? There's some kind of micro action that we can all take to be supportive. I think that Tulsa is the clearest case for reparations that we have. And so if we can't make it work for Tulsa, we can't make it work. And I think it's just a matter of putting the pressure on the right people, the right leverage points, because the argument is so clear, it's palpable. The pain is still today. The Descendants, there are 6 people still alive who experienced it. This is not past history. These pictures are in color. It's right now. And then as I think about what we need to do and who we need to get behind, I think about the people who are creating their own tables and get behind those folks, the people who are creating in the venture space, in the Black innovation space, Keisha Cash from the Impact America Fund, Cheryl Dorsey of Plug, the Black Innovation Alliance, where people are coming into collective and into community with each other to focus on their domains. Black VC, I think about Native Women Lead, and I think about the list of fund advisors that was created by my colleague at Mission Investors Exchange when I was over there, that are people that you can support today. Fund leaders, accelerators, debt, equity, all across the space. David Sharp with the Up Community Fund, Ashani Omard, Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund, Camino Financial, focusing on the Latinx community through Neo CDFI. Find people today. If you're an investor, there are folks, if you are an entrepreneur, be in community with these funders, and we can strengthen our power by working collaboratively, not being in the competitive position that is their framing and not our framing. In our communities often work, and the legacy of our ancestors was about community, and then working with those mindsets. What are the wisdom of our ancestors that we should be bringing to this moment and to today, and asking ourselves? I ask every guest on my podcast, how can I be a good ancestor in this moment? What do you need to do? So that it's personal, and thinking about the legacy, small and large, that we can leave, to be able to make a difference with each next decision, and also in the places where we have power in our industries, and how we ladder that up to the systems change that we're calling for. Ultimately, the film is one way, and a beautiful way, to stand on our history, to tell the truth loudly, like we talked about, and then what? Do things differently.
Thank you. That was great. Those were great list of actions that I'm going to double back to myself after this. So thank you. Nailah, I hand it to you, Nailah. What are one or two actionable ways that we can use the legacy of Black Wall Street and its descendants to build a better Black community in 2021 and beyond?
I think what's one great thing about film is that it's made and then it's forever out there. So I'm glad that it's a tool that can continue to be used, and it can be used in a platform like this. It can be in schools. And for me, I think it does a lot of the work, a lot of the explaining the history. It does a lot of the explaining why it's still a relevant conversation right now. And so for me, that's one big thing. But I also think, looking back at organizations like Justice for Greenwood, and they're not the only one, they're the one that's the top of mind for me right now. And looking at other ways that we can support the Descendants, but I think continuing to engage with Tulsa, and then also looking at, I mean, there's the town in California, I think the Black town that just got their beachfront property back.
Beach.
Yeah. So looking at places like that and remaining hopeful, right? That if we just keep chipping away, things can start to change. And one other thing that's, I think, become a lot clearer to me too since making this film is just the number of other cities and towns that maybe it wasn't a Tulsa race massacre, maybe it was the town was drowned, other things like that, like people forcibly moved. And so I would say the two action items are continue to support Greenwood, but then also continue to dig into your history and learn these stories and uplift these stories in this history. Because again, like I said, I think whoever tells us the history controls the narrative. And that's where a lot of our power really lies.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Byron, do you have anything to add on one to two actionable ways we can use the legacy of Black Wall Street and its descendants to build a better Black community in 2021 and beyond?
Absolutely, yeah. Honestly, I think we should all give props to Nailah, because I think she killed this and exemplified it, right? Like, she is someone who took her skill set, used it for the greater good of Black Tulsans, Black people abroad, right? And also supports policyholders and people in place who, on different fronts, also push for reparations and retribution, right? So I think those are the two most important things to do, right? Is to use your own personhood in the best way you can and support others who do the same, you know? So yeah, I just want to say that like, I'm honored to be in the documentary, to speak my truth, and be a part of this bigger thing than all of us, because I think it was so beautifully done and it was carefully done. you can see. I mean, I'm still noticing different things every time I watch it. This is a piece of art in this bigger wheel that's going to move forward. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Agreed. And thank you, Nailah. Same for me. I work for PushBlack. We share daily Black history. We share stories on Tulsa, like you mentioned, and some of the imagery I saw in the documentary, I'd seen like a year ago when I was creating like a social media post. So it was kind of like a full circle. That was my first time actually digging into the history of Black Wall Street. So to be able to have this to pair with this post that I made amongst others and really have the commentary from Descendants, and it just paired together so beautifully in a way that just really helps to paint the picture where you get the pride from this, but you also get the history and you get a really in-depth feeling of how this impacted people. And then you get to leave it with some thoughts and just things to think about as far as how to move forward and how this has impacted our ancestors. So I genuinely enjoyed it. I watched it about 3 times myself as well. So
Thank you.
I watched it twice in 24 hours, and it's very meaningful.
But really, you know what? It wouldn't be anything without like Byron and the Descendants and sharing their story and bringing their truth to the film. Every time you make a film that's like this, when you ask people to confront something that's not comfortable or easy, I really I appreciate that. I just appreciate all that goes into it, and you just walk away hoping that they don't regret it. And so I appreciate that, and I am so grateful that they were able to really buy into what we were trying to accomplish, and they felt empowered. And I think the biggest thing is when Byron told me that he felt like it was kind of healing for the family. So and so did Michelle and Jacqueline in the film. So I think that we're just doing our part, and everyone's doing their part. So I would say even to other people, no matter what your story is, if it's as famous as Black Wall Street or not, really uplift the stories of your ancestors who didn't have the platforms to do them before. And it's a great empowering tool, and I think it's a step in the right direction of us just owning our stories, and again finding wealth in other ways that are not just material.
Agreed. Was there anything that we left out throughout this discussion that you all want to take a chance to uplift in regards to the documentary? Well, thank you all. And I totally agree. I think, Monique, you mentioned it earlier, and I think we all kind of agree. Storytelling is a huge way that we keep the legacy going and that we create the future for people after us, is that we keep telling them, we keep documenting and coming together in spaces like these to talk about them in different ways. So I really appreciate sharing this space with you all, and Camelback for giving us this opportunity to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you and to have the opportunity to watch the film a few times, and I look forward to sharing it with others as well. It's such an important lesson, and so never forget, and let's use this energy to propel us forward into the next normal that we require, that we need, that we demand. Thank you, Camelback, also for inviting me, and for the film producers and the families of being so vulnerable and sharing their story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Camelback. Thank you, everyone here. This was a beautiful panel.
Yeah, thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.